Have you ever been deep in the woods and suddenly felt like you weren't alone? Not because you heard something clear, but because the silence around you started to feel wrong. Almost like the forest itself was holding its breath. This happened to me a few years ago during a solo hiking trip. What started as a peaceful walk through the trees slowly turned into one of the most disturbing experiences of my life. I had planned the trip for weeks. I wanted to spend a few days away from the city and enjoy the quiet of nature. The trail I chose was deep inside a national forest, far away from busy campsites and popular hiking areas. I liked the idea of being completely alone with nothing but the sound of nature around me. The first few hours were exactly what I expected. The forest was calm. Birds were singing somewhere above the trees, and the wind gently moved the leaves. Everything felt normal until I heard something strange in the distance. At first, I thought it was just another hiker somewhere far away, but the sound wasn't talking. It was whistling, a slow, uneven whistle echoing between the trees. It was quiet, but clear enough that I knew it wasn't just the wind. I stopped walking and listened carefully. The whistle continued for a few seconds, then suddenly stopped. The forest went completely silent. No birds, no wind. Just that heavy feeling that something wasn't right. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe someone camping nearby. Maybe another hiker trying to call their friend. So I kept walking deeper along the trail, hoping the strange feeling would disappear. About 10 minutes later, I heard the whistle again, but this time it sounded closer, much closer than before. And that's when I realized something that made my stomach drop. I hadn't seen a single person on that trail all day. I slowly turned around, scanning the trees behind me. But the forest looked completely empty. Nothing moved. No footsteps, no voices. Just rows of tall trees stretching in every direction. Then the whistle came again. This time, directly behind me. I didn't wait to investigate. Every instinct in my body told me the same thing. Leave, now. I started walking faster down the trail, trying not to panic. Have you ever sat alone beside a campfire deep in the woods, where the darkness stretches far beyond the reach of the firelight? Out there, the night feels different. The trees seem taller, the shadows feel heavier, and every small sound suddenly matters. A few years ago, I went on a solo camping trip far away from the nearest town because I wanted peace and quiet. But that night, something in the forest made me realize that sometimes the woods are not as empty as they seem. I had spent the entire afternoon hiking through a long forest trail before finally finding a small clearing to set up my tent. The place felt perfect. There were no other campsites nearby, no sounds of cars, and no signs of other hikers. It was just me, the trees, and the quiet wilderness stretching in every direction. As night slowly fell, the forest became darker and quieter. I lit a small campfire and sat beside it while cooking some simple food. The fire crackled softly, sending small sparks into the air, while the rest of the forest disappeared into darkness. It felt peaceful, the kind of quiet you rarely experience in everyday life. After eating, I leaned back in my chair and listened to the sounds of the night. Crickets chirped somewhere in the distance, and occasionally the wind moved gently through the branches above me. Everything felt normal, until I suddenly heard the sharp sound of a branch snapping somewhere beyond the firelight. I looked up immediately and stared into the darkness between the trees. My first thought was that it was probably an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon wandering through the woods. But as I watched carefully, I realized I couldn't see anything moving at all. The forest looked completely still. A few minutes passed, and I started to relax again. But just as I reached for my drink, I heard another sound. This time it wasn't a branch. It sounded more like footsteps slowly moving through dry leaves somewhere between the trees. I stood up and called out into the darkness, asking if someone was there. Maybe another camper had wandered too close to my sight without realizing it. My voice echoed slightly through the trees, but no one answered. The footsteps stopped immediately after I spoke. For a few seconds, the forest became completely silent again. But even though nothing moved, I couldn't shake the strange feeling that someone was still out there watching from somewhere beyond the trees. Not wanting to make the situation worse, I slowly sat back down and tried to ignore the feeling. But then, just beyond the edge of the firelight, I noticed something that made my heart start pounding. For a brief second, I saw what looked like a figure standing between two trees. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it toward the spot as fast as I could. But the moment the beam of light reached the trees, the figure was gone. There was nothing there, just empty forest, swaying branches, and the quiet darkness of the woods. I stayed awake the rest of that night beside the fire, because deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been standing there watching me. Have you ever seen something strange in the woods at night and tried to convince yourself it was just your imagination? Maybe a shadow moving between the trees or a strange light flickering far away. But sometimes, the things you see in the darkness are very real. And once you notice them, it becomes impossible to ignore them. A few years ago, a friend and I decided to go hiking in a remote forest area that was known for its long trails and quiet campsites. We wanted a peaceful weekend away from the city, so we packed our gear and drove several hours until we reached the trailhead. After hiking for most of the day, we finally found a small clearing where we could set up our tent. The sun was already starting to disappear behind the trees, and the forest slowly became darker as night approached. Later that night, we sat beside a small campfire, talking quietly, while the forest around us became completely dark. The only light came from the fire and the faint glow of the stars above the trees. At one point during the conversation, my friend suddenly stopped talking and stared into the woods. He slowly pointed toward the trees and asked me if I could see the same thing he was seeing. At first, I didn't notice anything unusual, but then, deep between the trees, I saw a faint glowing light appear. It was small, almost like the light from a distant lantern. The strange part was that the light didn't stay still. It slowly moved sideways between the trees, drifting quietly through the darkness in a way that didn't look like a normal flashlight or lantern. We both stood up and watched it carefully. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. The light kept moving slowly through the forest, disappearing behind one tree and then reappearing between another. Eventually, curiosity got the better of us, and we decided to walk a little closer to see what it was. But as we stepped away from the campfire and moved toward the trees, the light suddenly stopped moving. Then, without warning, the strange light faded completely and disappeared into the darkness. No footsteps, no voices, no explanations. We searched the area the next morning, but we never found any sign of another campsite or person nearby. Even now, I still wonder what that light was, and why it seemed to disappear the moment we tried to get closer.
If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe my channel. See you on next videos. Till then, goodbye.